Testing 1, 2. Hey there, I'm Nile Rodgers. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I can't remember exactly where I first heard about Leadbelly and knew that in fact it was Leadbelly, but I remember hearing uh, certain songs, and they were probably the field recordings. I remember when I was a child, I used to hear um, I think it was like, jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton, jump down, turn around, pick a bale of And the thing that I remember when I was a kid is that it got like insanely fast. By the time they got to the end of the recording, it was going, and I was very, very, very young, and it had that. I don't know how to explain it, but it had that limited bandwidth type of recording thing that you associate with old music. And I was a kid, so what I was hearing on the radio sounded modern, but his stuff sounded old-fashioned, but it was still catchy. It was the type of thing that was very, very appealing to a kid. And because of the cadence and and I never realized that the same guy who was singing was playing when I first heard it. So the musical part of it sounded interesting as hell, but I was so young I didn't really quite put it all together.
The first time I heard Leadbelly was in the mid-50s, and I guess I was 10 or 11 at the time. And there was a kind of movement of skiffle music, which was played a lot on the radio, and Lonnie Donegan had a big hit with a song called Rock Island Line.
It's a mighty good road, and if you own the ride, you got to ride it like to find to get your ticket at the station on the Rock Island Line. I may be right, may be wrong, you know you're gonna miss me when I'm gone. Down the Rock Island Line, she's a mighty good road. The Rock Island Line is a road to ride it. The Rock Island Line is a mighty good road, and if you own the ride, you got to ride it like to find to get your ticket at the station on the Rock Island Line.
And that, of course, was a Leadbelly song. And when I heard the Leadbelly original, which they played on the radio one day, it was as if it kind of opened a huge kind of door for me in music. And well, for me, it kind of opened the door to rhythm and blues, rock and roll, and many other things, I suppose, afterwards. And it was the first time I'd heard any music that had really moved me. I guess Rock Island Line in a kind of rhythmic and energy way. The next Leadbelly thing that I heard was Goodnight Irene, because I guess due to the skiffle group craze, the radio started playing, the original versions of a lot of these songs that were being covered. And when I heard Goodnight Irene by Leadbelly, that was so amazing as well, because it was incredibly moving, very soulful, and it was very plaintive. There was so much yearning in his voice, and this reached out to me very strongly. And it was the beginning of my sort of, I suppose, obsession with music.
Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I get you in my dream.
When I finally saw Leadbelly as a performer, that was when I became older, and more aware of folk music. I grew up in the sort of political '60s, so the heroes of the day were the folk singers, the Bob Dylan's, Tim Hardin, Phil Oakes, Pat Sky, Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, people like that. And you could see how they were very, very, very influenced by Leadbelly, because he played 12-string guitar, and his style of 12-string, none of those people could play like him. I don't even know what he did. I don't know how he tuned his instrument, but if you listen to those classic recordings, there's a very distinctive sound going on in the upper register, while in the lower register there's an accompaniment. It's almost as if he's playing a technique similar to some of the classical guitarists who have those peculiar tuned guitars where they have extra strings just to play bass notes. So they have so the tunings are for each particular piece. Like, I can't swear to it, but I'm a guitar player, and I know that the stuff that he plays, you can't do that unless you're doing something very wacky to the instrument.
Of course, Leadbelly had, with Irene, although I think it's sometimes attributed to him, it's actually an old song, and a lot of the things that Leadbelly did were covers of existing folk songs which were passed from one region of America to another, and but his version of Goodnight Irene was the ultimate one, I think. Years later, I had the pleasure of doing my version of Goodnight Irene, and I haven't actually heard it for a bit, so I can't quite remember what I did except. I didn't have Leadbelly playing 12-string guitar, which is a shame.
Irene, God knows I do love her till sea runs dry. And if Irene turns her back on me, I'm gonna take morphine and die. Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. I see you
when you look at his influence, the influence of Leadbelly in pop it's probably he probably doesn't get the credit that he's due. And this is the unfortunate thing about music and history and timing. Look at the myth of this guy. I mean, let's just get real here. This is a person who was in jail for fighting with a white man and knifing him in America because of racial politics, and I mean they used to even call our music race music. This guy was so talented that he sang himself out of prison. I mean, people were responding to his voice. It was like, we got to get this guy out of here because he's too great. We have to show the world what he's doing.
Leadbelly, you're a fine songster. I've never heard so many good Negro songs. Thank you, sir, boss. I sure hope you send Governor O'Callaghan a record of that song I made up about him, because I believe he'll turn me loose. Leadbelly, I don't know this governor. You mustn't expect too much of me. Well, Governor Patton from Texas, he turned me loose when he heard the song that I made up about him. So you're in the Texas penitentiary too, Leadbelly? Yes, sir. It was 35 years for murder, but it was my fault. A man was trying to cut my head off. That's mighty bad, Leadbelly. I believe Governor O'Callaghan, if you just send him a record of that song, I believe he'll tune me loose. Leadbelly, I'll try it. Thank you, Sir Boss. Thank you, sir.
You know, I mean, how many stories are like that? I mean, you know, you hear about Johnny Cash and people like that, but to be a black man in prison for stabbing a white man and you can sing your way out of prison, that's pretty damn heavy. You know, he should be up there, you know, with Hendrix and the Beatles. That should be common knowledge. But unfortunately, only musicologists and people who are into history find these type of things out. It's you know, it should be more well known. So I feel he's underrated. I think he's not very well represented in history because of the extraordinary achievements. And also, you could probably write volumes on him. And I'm guessing because I'm not a historian. I don't really know. I just go from my childhood. But you could probably write volumes on his playing. If you just take the singing away and listen to what this guy is playing, I can't figure it out. I'm pretty damn good.
He played quite a cheap 12-string guitar called a Stella with very heavy strings, and that was part of his sound, that he played very hard, and apparently you could hear him miles away playing. He was quite a character. He would get up and do tap dances and shuffles and whatever, and so I think he was a bit of a showman as well as being a soulful voice. He was also a very sharp dresser and I believe a great womanizer. And we all know about how he had a tendency to violence sometimes, or at least in his earlier days, where he was actually in prison for murder one time or another. I suppose the fact that Leadbelly did covers of other songs made it seem okay to me that after I'd written my first couple of albums of material, I started doing covers myself, versions of other songs that I just felt like singing or trying to bring something of myself to, and it actually launched a whole other part of my career, doing cover versions of songs I liked.
I personally think his music is relevant to modern day recording artists, and the main reason why is because music and art, everything is cyclical, and he's a real artist. So it doesn't make any difference when his star will shine again. It'll always happen. So it's probably the same type of question that someone will ask someone else at some point in time about Kurt Cobain or something. He will be back in the spotlight again, and it'll just happen for all time. It'll be one of those things where in the year 3000 or 4000, people will say, listen to what music used to sound like in America. Listen to what folk music and blues and field recordings used to sound like.
He hit me at a very young and tender age, very impressionable age, and I just thought, wow, this is the greatest voice, and I think it's obviously had the same effect on many, many people.
Goodbye, BBC. This is Nile Rodgers signing off.
Brilliant.